Hello, thank you for joining us this week for our Discernment of Spirits. This is really an in-depth course, and I'm hoping you're enjoying it. If you're new tonight, I am Farah Rose Perry, Sister Farah, and I am sharing you a wonderful journey into the Discernment of Spirits, St. Francis of Loyola. Or this Ignation guide is just phenomenal. And the book we're using, you can find it on Amazon. Timothy Gallager wrote this, and we are reading excerpts to bring you some of the highlights of this wonderful study into the deepest part of the spiritual life that will lead us into peace and freedom. Self-exorcism, if you will. As I was saying, we're going to get started here. This today actually happens to be, and it's not Francis, it's St. Ignatius of Loyola. Apologies. I'm just so excited to get started because this is a really good chapter, and all these chapters are very, shall I say, they call us to a deeper understanding of who we are. And in order for us to assist others in helping in this discernment of spirits and helping them, we have to really know ourselves. We have to be able to identify, to dig deep. And I think that this book, this Discernment of Spirits by St. Ignatius, is really, it breaks it down so simply. And it breaks it down piece by piece by piece so that we can't ignore it. We can't not see it. And I think that as we learn and as we grow, we get better at practicing it. So I'm hoping you're enjoying this series, and thank you for joining me. If you're new here, what we do is we read excerpts from the book, ask you to bring a journal so that you can make notes on what's great and important for you. Swords of St. Michael Network is a small ministry designed to help people that are having spiritual difficulties, spiritual warfare issues, anything that is distressing their spirit that they don't quite understand. So there's lots of videos on this channel about the demonology, which I'm a religious demonologist, about spirits, superstitions, facts, visionaries, everything. So check out the channel if you get a chance, and I'm hoping you like the video. Give us a thumbs up, okay, and share it if you can. We're going to get right into it, start our prayer to St. Michael, and read the excerpts. Here we go. In nomine Patri et Filio et Spiritus Sancto, sic erat in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Sancta Michael Arcangele, defende nos in prelio. Contra nequitium in insidious diaboli esto presidium. Imperere Deus supplicius deprecamer tuque, princeps maletia celestis satana maliosque, spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum peregantur, in mundo divina virtute, in infernum detrude. Amen. Suscipe, our study prayer by St. Ignatius of Loyola. Suscipe Domine, universum meam libertatem, accipi memoriam, intellectuam, atque voluntatem omnem, quid avio ere possideo, mihi largitus es, et tibi totum restitio, ac tui prorsus volintati trade gubernandum, amorem tui solum, cum gratia tui mihi dones, et divi sum satis ec aluit quicquam ultra posco. Amen. Spiritual Desolation. Rule 6. A time for initiative. The changes we should make. The 6th rule. Although in desolation we should not change our first proposals, it is very advantageous to change ourselves intensely against the desolation itself. as by insisting more upon prayer, meditation, upon much examination, and upon extending ourselves in some suitable way of doing penance. If the former rule told us what we should not change in spiritual desolation, the present rule now indicates the changes we should make in time of spiritual desolation. This rule reiterates the norm that in spiritual desolation, we should not change our first proposals. That is, the spiritual choices decided before this desolation began. Here, Ignatius teaches further that spiritual desolation is not only a time for fidelity to the spiritual past, it is also, and energetically so, a time for spiritual initiative in the present. Spiritual desolation indeed is a time to quote-unquote charge within the bosom the Calvary of woe. The instruction of the preceding rule that we should make no changes to our spiritual proposals in time of spiritual desolation does not mean that we must otherwise passively await the sensation of desolation, that the best we can hope for is to resist harmful change while enduring resignedly the desolation itself. In spiritual desolation, there is a change to be made. A change that will prove to be very advantageous spiritually. We are not to change our proposals, but rather to change ourselves. To change ourselves intensely as to change ourselves precisely against the desolation itself. Quote, although in desolation we should not change our first proposals, it is very advantageous to change ourselves intensely against the desolation itself. End quote. We may hope to accomplish more than solely avoiding collaboration with the enemy's urging to change existing spiritual plans. Ignatius invites us to act intensely against the very desolation itself. There are situations of suffering that God does call us to beat, even at length. In spite of our best efforts, we may face difficult conditions of health, burdensome responsibilities, relational trials, and similar struggles that cannot be substantially altered and must simply be borne with God's aid. This is the cross that Jesus tells us will always be part of discipleship. Luke 9:23. And the one that leads us as it led Jesus to resurrection and newness of spiritual life. Ignatius, however, is not addressing such situations. Here, in Rule 6, he is referring specifically to spiritual desolation, and his teaching is clear. We are never merely called to endure such desolation passively until it somehow fades. God's call in time of spiritual desolation is always to take active steps to resist and reject the desolation itself. This is what Ignatius intends in presenting the call to change ourselves intensely against that desolation. Ignatius outlines the various spiritual means that serve to change ourselves against spiritual desolation when we experience it. Quote, as by insisting more prayer, meditation, upon much examination, and upon extending ourselves in some suitable way of doing penance. End quote. He names 4 such means and urges us to resist spiritual desolation. Spiritual desolation is thus, in Ignatius's understanding, the time for intensifying certain of our spiritual practices that may assist us in our confrontation with desolation. Each of these practices is valuable at any time in the spiritual life. In this rule, however, Ignatius has one specific context in mind. persons in time of spiritual desolation and how these means may be advantageously employed to sustain us in that precise setting. The principle of contrariety applies once more. Each of these means will hearten us to more move directly contrary to the harmful suggestions of spiritual desolation. Prayer. The first of these spiritual means, Ignatius writes, is prayer. And this may be understood as prayer of petition. Ignatius' first counsel is simply to pray, to turn to God, who says, quote unquote, ask and it shall be given to you. Matthew 7:7. And beg his help in resisting and overcoming the desolation. Often in spiritual desolation, the more so when it is intense, we experience a sense of helplessness. The enemy insinuates the inevitability of defeat. And at such times, the first spiritual means is to pray, to petition our God and those who intercede for us with God in the communion of saints, for the assistance we will need in times of trial. Now, as simple as this may appear when expounded, the concrete reality in time of spiritual desolation may be very different. In the pain and distress of desolation, when spiritual things have lost their sense of attraction, prayer may be far from our minds because we feel ourselves as if separated from our Creator and Lord. The actual turning to God in prayer may require conscious effort. Such turning toward God in prayer directly counters the sense of separation from God induced by spiritual desolation. Experience reveals the profound efficacy of such prayer petition in times of spiritual desolation. Through this prayer, God already seems less remote and we feel less alone. Through it, the sense of growing distance from God begins to reverse. An expectancy of spiritual defeat gives way to stirrings of trust and hope in God that we will be victorious. God, who hears the cry of the poor. Psalms 34:6. God does not leave us without his strengthening grace when we call upon him. Meditation. This counsel is more than a recommendation of meditation as a generally helpful spiritual practice. Ignatius continues to address persons afflicted by spiritual desolation. To them, he proposes a particular kind of meditation directed toward replenishing their spiritual energy in a situation of special vulnerability. The time of spiritual desolation. Such meditation focuses on the sustaining truth of God's faithful love as a source of hope in time of distress. Spiritual desolation is a time of confusion and darkness. This meditation enkindles a light of faith to illuminate the darkness. Spiritual desolation disquiets the person. This meditation opens the heart to the Lord's gift of peace. John 14:27. Spiritual desolation diminishes faith, hope, and love. This meditation time nourishes our trust, invigorates our hope, and confirms us in God's love. Much examination. Like prayer and meditation, examination in time of spiritual desolation Precisely when we are immersed in the painful ordeal itself and are least inclined to be within, will not happen spontaneously. We must decide and choose willingly to face and examine the spiritual desolation. In a very real sense, it will appear easier and seem more welcome to find escape in diversions and temptations. At such times, we may immerse ourselves in busyness, the media, various gratifications of a more or less healthy nature. All of them in this case serve as a way to be without when being within seems too uncomfortable. Unhappily, we generally discover that on the other side of the diversion, when the busyness and the gratifications have terminated, the spiritual desolation remains. The aspirin, quote unquote, has worn off without truly healing the pain in its source. In fact, the longer we delay confronting it, the more this pain tends to increase. This much examination that Ignatius counsels here directly counters such a flight into diversions. Extending ourselves in some suitable way of doing penance, as with the three preceding spiritual means of initiative, this fourth, which consists in some suitable ways of doing penance, applies specifically to the time of spiritual desolation and is undertaken as a means to reject it. As we have said, the interior discomfort of spiritual desolation invites an escape into external diversion and gratifications of various kinds. An escape that protracts and may even deepen the desolation. So the call to extend ourselves in some suitable way of doing penance will encourage us yet again to oppose directly a tendency of spiritual desolation in place of an unsuitable indulgence that prolongs our unhappiness. Ignatius proposes a suitable penance that energizes us in a healthy spiritual way that aids in overcoming the spiritual desolation itself. Now, this penance is suitable when it counters the precise tendency to flight that we feel in the desolation and permits us to act against the specific form of desolation we are undergoing. Now, if in desolate prayer, when God seems far away and our efforts useless, there's a tendency to resolve the heaviness by ending the prayer sooner than planned. Then, says Ignatius, the suitable remedy is to do exactly the opposite. In the first place, we should reject that tendency to shorten the prayer and should continue for the full time as planned before the spiritual desolation began. In fact, says Ignatius, rather than shorten the prayer, we may even lengthen it. Perhaps just a minute or two beyond the time originally planned. In this way, we habituate ourselves not only to resist the adversary, but to overthrow him. Ignatius offers in this paragraph one illustration of the small but well-directed acts of courage that act against the desolation and fortify us in our ability to resist and overcome the enemy. Perhaps it is not by chance that in portraying these four means, Ignatius begins first of all with humble supplication and prayer. In contending with spiritual desolation, we know that as Jesus tells us, without me, you can do nothing. John 15:5. We know too that with Paul, we can confidently say, quote unquote, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. Philippians 4:13. Experience teaches Ignatius that by humbly and sincerely striving to use the means he proposes in this rule, we will grow in the ability to use them and so become increasingly able to face spiritual desolation without fear. Although this list is by no means exhaustive, and Ignatius will suggest a number of further means in the rules that follow. Nonetheless, this sixth rule already begins to equip us solidly to resist spiritual desolation. Through its teaching, our feet are already set on the road to spiritual freedom. Wow. I love it when we have a saint like this that outlines exactly what it is we need to do. I'm the kind of person that I need everything, all my little I's dotted, my T's crossed, and Ignatius he's doing this 1,000-fold for us. And he's basically telling us if we're going to defeat the enemy of our mind, if we're going to help others defeat the enemy, boom, 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 line this up, get it out, get ready. It's not a matter of if you will ever encounter spiritual desolation. The closer you desire to get to God, the more you desire to serve him, it's just a matter of when. When will it happen? When will you feel so desolate in your prayers, in your determination to serve in church, as a head of your family, as a mother, in your desire to do more for God? And this is beginning to become clearer that not only do we have the tools, we have the means. It's a matter of changing our hearts and minds that we do have the will. And as this chapter was saying, I've done this a number of times. Oh my goodness. It was so easy the last few years to turn to diversions, trips, get my nails done, get my hair done. It was so easy to look to diversions when I was experiencing spiritual desolation. What would my vocation be? Would I be called, to the Carmelites, or, continue in my Franciscan? Would I be called to a third order? Would I be called to maybe be Benedictine? I was so confused and I was so torn by so many things. I was praying and not knowing. And I'll tell you what, I didn't have Ignatius's rules, but I had a good spiritual director that encouraged me to do regular rosary novenas and to increase my petitions to the saints. If you understand, if you're a Catholic that understands what relics are, and you have your altar, and you can petition these saints to assist you. A spiritual desolation is like standing in the middle of a room with people that you love and you rely on and are right there, and somebody turns out the light and you can't hear anything and you can't feel anything and you don't know where you're at. You know they're still there because your mind knows they didn't leave. You just felt them a minute ago because they haven't gone anywhere. But it's almost as if somebody drops a black bag over you and you're without a rudder. And in this sense, and I know that's a really bad example maybe, when we enter into spiritual desolation, this is our time to not stop whatever we're doing, not stop our daily offering, not stop, going to mass daily or however often you go, not stop doing our lauds or our angelus at 9, noon, and 3, not stop doing vespers at night with your favorite online priest, deacon, or whoever it is that you follow. We're not to stop what we did before we enter spiritual desolation. We're supposed to buckle down and do it no matter what we feel, because we know the enemy will lie to us, number one. The enemy will confuse us, number two. And the enemy will continue to feed us ugly lies that you cannot win, you will not get an answer, and it will be more confusing the more we take time and we play and we try and make ourselves feel better emotionally or physically. The spiritual desolation feels worse. It feels as if we're singled out, that God really isn't listening, and all the petitions you ask people to pray for you, it feels like nothing. It's a real bad hole to be in. And when we continue, like Ignatius instructs us, to pray, say, God, help me. Be it done to me according to thy will, God, according to thy will, or the sinner's prayer. Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Our prayers will be heard. Our prayers will be answered. It just doesn't feel like it. And then, when we step into, like Ignatius says, into meditation, and we take our fears, and, when you're older like me, you kind of think, well, gosh, what does God want from me? Almost being 60 kind of makes you think, well, I'm really not useful here, I'm not useful there. And then, of course, you're listening to all these lies. You don't think that you have much to offer. And it rips apart how you see yourself. So the spiritual desolation affects you in other ways. When you're looking to get closer to God, the other areas of your life you're going to be tripping into, such as in previous chapters, if you're not sleeping properly, if you're not taking care of your health, if you are not doing what you need to do to take care of yourself in other areas, if you are filling your head with, there's no other way to say it, but filth on the internet. If you're looking at videos that are constant gossip, negative images, if you're feeding yourself a steady stream of news and scantily clad bodies, your mind is going to basically go in the gutter, and the spiritual desolation, as Ignatius says, is going to be 1,000% worse. So we need to stay away from those things and look to meditation to be a time of, I can enter into the Word of God and take one line that inspires me and ask God, just meditate on it, think about it in your mind, and ask God to reveal to you the joy of that one line. It's really, really a great way to meditate on, with your Bible. And the other thing, extending yourself to do penance. Now, a lot of people think, oh my gosh, the penitence this, the penitence that. It's so hard, it's so horrible, it's so difficult to live up to. When you think about penance, a lot of people think that, oh my gosh, I've got to fast, or I got to give up meals, I got to give up this. A simple penance can be keeping your mouth shut when you know something and letting someone else speak. Say, Lord, I'm offering up my desire to take over this moment, and I'm offering this up to you for the spiritual desolation that I'm in right now, and I'm doing it consciously. Great ways to do this. I used to carry around like little business cards. I know it sounds stupid, but I'd have one in the car, I'd have one at my desk, I'd have one where I'd have my coffee so I could see, not today, Satan, not today, Satan, penance, offer it up. So I did try to remind myself that As Saint Therese said, it's the little ways, it's the little things, because these little things can add up to great things. So don't think that when you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to do a penance that really means something, that, is going to be recognized. I've got to, fast for 3 meals, or, I mean, and fasting's great. I'm not knocking fasting. You can fast for 16, 18, 24, 36, 48, 72. I fasted for weeks, so it's up to you. However, don't do anything without your doctor's help, advice, and think about what the end game is. Tiring yourself out and exhausting yourself in a penance is not going to help a period of spiritual desolation when you're feeling like your prayers aren't answered and you want to get closer to God. You want something that is going to chip away every single block, every lie that the devils are giving you in your head. All right? So let's look at what I wrote down for just the suggestions for this week's chapter 6. Okay? Now that was a book. And here we are on the Discernment of Spirits notes. Thank you for joining us. I'm hoping you're going to give this a thumbs up, a like, and I'm hoping you're going to get some pointers to deal with your own spiritual warfare, discernment of spirits, getting rid of and casting out these little devils in our lives. In your journal, I'd like you to consider a couple of things, because, like I said, it's not a matter of if it's ever going to happen to you. It's just a matter of when. So let's look at when. And as we project to the future on the areas in our life where we think we can be attacked, we might be weak in our prayer life and our walk with God, let's look at those areas that we're vulnerable when we have experienced spiritual desolation or emotional desolation. Because if we don't know to discern the difference, how are we going to discern the spirits that are attacking us? So in the sense of, just to give an example of my spiritual desolation, where was I vulnerable? I was vulnerable in my ability to be a good wife. I was vulnerable in my ability to be a good mother. I was vulnerable in my lack of confidence in my skills and my joy and love of life, thinking, well, maybe I'm better off alone for the rest of my life. Maybe, I didn't do a good job. So we need to look at those areas where we feel weak, we feel where we may not be good enough, and write that down. And I want you to counter in your journal for every item that you write and you think that you're not good enough. I want you to write down a simple statement, okay? His grace is enough. That's it. His grace is enough. And I want you to look at that. Because whatever you think you're not, you've been given the grace for. We just need to write it, look at it, read it, and then we're going to start believing it. His grace is enough. Okay? 2, let's choose and list just a few counteractions so we can better prepare ourselves to surrender and enter into these small acts of penance and, combating this future spiritual desolation. Now, and when I talk about listing counteractions, all right, listing counteractions like we just went over, prayer, meditation, extending ourselves to, doing penance, small acts of penance. I think that as we find ourselves in any kind of attack situation where we feel we're attacked, or we're not feeling anything, or we're not feeling like we're being listened to, I think that we have to understand one little building block at a time can pull us out, as St. Ignatius points out. When we list little counteractions, like maybe we wear a cross around our neck and we can kiss it, and maybe we can carry around holy water, simple prayer. By this holy water and by thy precious blood, Lord, please wash away my sins. Simple, sweet, effective. Let's list those counteractions so that we can better prepare ourselves. Maybe it is a rosary bracelet. Maybe you want to carry a key ring. which, that means I have to advertise. I'm on Etsy under Prayers by the Beat, and I do have prayersbythebeat.com. If you need anything, I make lots of really amazing stuff with all kinds of colors, saints and everything else. But sometimes having little reminders, whether it's on your rearview mirror, whether it's in your purse, whether it's on your desk, having little reminders that we can combat these things is mega helpful. Don't ever forget it. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on your Sunday evening or whichever evening it is. And I want to tell you that I pray for you, my audience, and I thank you so much for going on these journeys with me, because these journeys really do, they stretch us and they help us build a better understanding of the spiritual warfare we live in. And it is awful right now. But guess what? We know the end story. We know the end game. So we have no fear. And if you need to know anything about baptism or have any questions about the series, please pop them below. Give us a like and a thumbs up here. Subscribe. You have to hit that little bell so that you get notifications. And please come back for next week's chapter 7. God bless you. Good night. And hopefully you're going to enjoy some more videos here at Sword of St. Michael, because we're here to help you win the fight and win it right. God bless you. Good night.